Well, good morning, everyone. We'll call to order the MAPS 3 Citizens Advisory Board member for March the 24th, 2011. It's the appointed hour, and we've now called the meeting to order. The first item for us to consider is the minutes of the February 24th, 2011 meeting. Are there additions or corrections to the minutes? It's been moved and seconded that the minutes be approved as provided. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The minutes are approved. We are delighted to welcome some familiar faces. Nicole and Mike, welcome to the meeting. We will have a presentation about the implementation plan. Mike Mize of ADG is here to present that implementation plan to us. Mike, welcome.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Board members, Eric, it's a pleasure to be here. I realize that for some of you, some of what you see will be a repeat of what we presented over the last 2 days in the 7 subcommittee meetings. I actually considered asking Mike Adams to give this presentation today because he's been at 6 of the 7 meetings, and I'm sure he could give this presentation as well as I could. The purpose of the presentation is to provide you today with a preliminary program order, which we will get to a little further on in the program. I also want to mention that I'm here with my colleague, Nicole Franklin from ADG, who's been instrumental in helping put this together. We'll start with just as a very brief overview of the MAPS programs in general and the MAPS 3 program. As you know, we started collecting tax revenues for this program in April of 2010. Over that time period, we have collected, the city has collected approximately $70 million, which is very much on track with the city's projections of where we should be to date. So that's a very positive step forward. One of the things, the caveats I'd like to bring up is that the information that we're providing today is based in part on incomplete or partial data. We've taken the materials that we have and have tried to use those materials as well as the input that we've received from attending all of the subcommittee meetings, input we've received from this board, from City Council. We've also spent a significant amount of time reviewing documentation that's presented to us in the form of studies and master plans for some of the specific projects. We're doing a significant amount of research on our own and continue to do more research and collection of data. And as that data comes in and becomes available and we've had time to analyze it, it will be made available to this board and to City Council. The next time we will be able to provide you with an update of that information will be April 19th at a scheduled joint meeting of City Council and the Citizens Advisory Board. So this plan is subject to change and modification, and I just want you to know that it's not a final plan until City Council actually approves it. Just a a brief summary of the published budgets for each of the projects. The one thing I'd like to note in particular at the very bottom is that there is a $17 million program contingency. That contingency we hope to try to maintain throughout the life of the program. It's there to help us in cases where projected budgets and cost estimates aren't met during actual bidding. So there would be some program contingency available to help augment the program budget so that we can keep individual projects to the level of quality and scope that are designed. It's also there as an additional hedge against inflation. We hope to maintain that throughout the life of the project, and we'll keep you informed about the amount of that contingency as we move forward. Other budget considerations with respect to individual projects. Each individual project includes the budget includes not only a construction cost, but it includes a number of other components which are necessary for each individual project. This is a general list. Not all of these apply to each project, but I'll go through the general list. Project budgets need to include any consulting which is done for that particular project. It needs to include architecture and engineering fees. It needs to include other pre-construction costs, such as environmental engineering. Depending on the nature and the scope of the land where the project is going to be constructed, there may need to be environmental studies, and there may need to be environmental remediation, all of which will come out of the project budget. There may be geotechnical and other construction testing as well. Land acquisition is applicable to some of the projects, but not necessarily all. Obviously, construction comes out of that budget. And then there's an individual project contingency. That contingency is to help cover a number of things. Change orders that may occur in the normal process of construction. It's there to help also potentially with changes of scope in the project, and also to help as another hedge against inflation. With respect to how the budgets are being treated in the program order that you've received today, each of the budgets is defined as a program midpoint budget. That means those dollars, to take the Fair Park as an example, the $60 million for the Fair Park, assumes a start date for all of the work at the Fair Park of January 1st, 2016. Projects which come before January 1st, 2016 may have smaller budgets, and projects which come later may have larger budgets. This is to help try to achieve parity and reduce some of the effects of inflation. Excuse me. I think one of the best examples I can give of how that works is if you think about the wellness centers. If you have two wellness centers which are intended to be reasonably identical, and I'm not saying that they will all be the same, but if we have two that are similar, if one comes very early in the program, it's going to require fewer dollars to build than one that comes later in the program because of the impact of inflation. So we've tried to use a constant inflation factor right now of 3% per year, which is just what we think is a reasonable guess based on historical data that we have, to try and provide for some parity among those projects that come early and the projects that come late. I'm now going to talk a little bit about each of the individual projects. The Convention Center, just as a reminder of the scope, we're anticipating 200,000 square feet of exhibit space, 50,000 square feet of meeting space, and 35,000 square feet of ballroom space. The actual size and scope of the Convention Center will be determined by the actual dollars that are available. We will take into account inflation and increases in construction costs at the time that we go to move these projects forward. And just as a reminder, I mentioned in all of the subcommittee meetings, construction costs right now are extremely difficult to predict. With the rising cost of oil, the rising cost of steel, the probable impact that the disaster in Japan will have over the next 3 to 4 years. They will, in all likelihood, have a significant demand for construction, basic construction commodities such as steel and cement and petroleum-based products. So we need to keep that in mind as we move forward. Excuse me, the published budget is $280 million, which includes $30 million for the relocation of an electrical substation. The we will build these to the design and build these to the budget that is available at the time that the projects are placed in the order of the program. Timing, the reason that the convention center is, one of the reasons the convention center is currently the last project located on the program order which you've received today, is that it is the most expensive project, and since this is a pay-as-you-go program, it requires that all of the dollars required for any phase of any project be available and effectively in the bank before a contract can be let. Because of the size of the convention center and the probable construction budget, it would take 2 years minimum to raise and maintain the amount of money that would be required for construction. We do have site acquisition for the convention center very early in the project. The design is currently on the program order to begin near the midpoint of the program, with construction to follow. The downtown park scope. Previous studies have provided possible amenities and programming that could be available in the park. Once again, the actual programming and scope will be determined by the actual construction dollars that are available at that time. There's a published budget of $130 million for both the upper and lower parks. The upper park's approximately 40 acres. The lower park is approximately 30. And in terms of timing, the upper park, as currently located in the program order, would begin design work fairly quickly, with the intent that the park would be open, the upper park would be open and accessible concurrently with the completion of the boulevard, which, to the best of our knowledge right now, is scheduled for 2014. Acquisition, I think you're aware that acquisition of land required for the lower park will actually not begin until 2014. So design and construction of the lower park would take place after that time frame. Modern streetcar and transit hub. Published descriptions would indicate approximately 5 to 6 miles of track. We've done some preliminary cost analysis and believe that that is a fairly reasonable and achievable number right now. That 5 to 6 miles of track also has to include track that will provide access to the multimodal hub and to the maintenance facility. The cost, there's a published budget of $130 million, which includes the cost of rail, cars, the hub, and the maintenance facility, as well as any consultant work and architectural and engineering fees. Excuse me. The timing is that early engineering may begin as early as this summer. One of the things to keep in mind is that lead time on rail and on cars can be fairly significant. Historically, rail can take up to 9 months. Cars can take 2 years to 2.5 years. We have placed a significant piece of the work early in the project with the hope of trying to complete a 4-mile loop that would be available and accessible to the public sometime just before the midpoint of the program. Oklahoma River improvements. Most of the projects that are listed in the river program have been provided by the Oklahoma City Boathouse Foundation. We are in the process right now of working with the river subcommittee to help identify and prioritize those projects. It is likely that some of the projects may have to be scaled back or in some form in order to meet the budget, which they will have to complete this work. Once again, that will be dependent on the available construction dollars. The published budget is $60 million. We have some rough estimates of work that has been provided to us. We're in the process of trying to refine those budgets right now. There's also some land acquisition costs that will need to come out of the $60 million budget. We have scheduled two projects very early in the program, and one of those is the race course, sometimes referred to as stadium-type lighting, for the 1,000-mile section of course that includes the finish line. 1,000-mile. Thank you, Eric. You didn't have to say anything. 1,000-yard course. I'm sorry? Okay. I'm glad you guys are up there. Thank you. 1,000 meters. So one of the early projects would be the lighting. Another project would be a study for potential windscreens along that same 1,000-meter course. Other projects will be distributed are shown distributed throughout the program. You'd think after doing this 7 times I'd get it right. State Fairgrounds. The project, as anticipated, follows the State Fair Park master plan. It anticipates a 300,000 square foot exhibit hall and some possible parking as well. The published budget is $60 million. The current estimates that we have indicate that there may be some budget constraints that will have to be taken into consideration to help determine the actual size and scope of this project. There are some scheduling challenges with the Fair Park. There's a period of approximately 4 months where it's very undesirable to have a lot of construction work going on at the Fair Park. That's from September to December, when the State Fair occurs and some other very popular and well-attended events take place. So we've tried to take that into consideration, and the project begins in the early part of the middle of the program. Health and wellness centers. In some ways, this is the least defined of the projects. As most of you are aware, there is a study going on currently by AIP and KDM to help define potential scope for the wellness centers. We have, through one of our independent consultants, received some information that leads us to believe that 4 is the most probable number of wellness centers that will be built. We have additional information that we need to review, but we really believe that 4 is the probable number. The published budget is $50 million. Timing, City Council has requested that some of these wellness centers be constructed as early as possible in the program, so you'll see that there is one that begins fairly early in the program, and the other 3 are spread out throughout the probably early 2/3 of the program. Trails improvements. We have in part followed the Oklahoma City Trails Master Plan in our review and analysis of the Trails program. It's anticipated that there are approximately 50 miles of new trail to be built. I want to go back to an earlier comment I made. One of the construction materials that is most volatile right now in terms of price is asphalt. These trails are typically built out of asphalt because it is a much more conducive surface for runners. So this is something that we're going to have to keep a close eye on as we develop plans to begin design and construction of the trails. There may be some land acquisition costs for some sections of the trail that will also have to be taken into consideration. The published budget is $40 million. We've broken this into 4 phases. By the time of the April meeting, that may be different. We may have 3 phases. We need to refine that a little bit more as we go forward. Timing, once again, City Council's recommended and requested that we provide some trails early in the project, and we've made every attempt to try to do that. Sidewalk, in some ways similar to trails. We've divided this into 4 phases, assumed 70 miles of sidewalk. They're typically concrete, but that's another cost that is fairly volatile right now. Once again, the actual cost at the time of construction will determine the number of miles. Published budget is $10 million. This is another project that City Council has requested that we try to move to the front of the program, and that we've tried to accomplish that as well. What's up here right now is really just a reiteration of some of the points that I've made regarding potential fluctuation in budgets. There are a number of factors which we don't control, including the actual collection of tax revenues. As I pointed out, we're currently on track. That's good news. We don't know and can't predict how that will actually play out in the future. One of the things that we will do as part of the program and as part of our responsibilities is work with city staff to review the program order on a very frequent basis and update it based on actual construction costs, based upon bids received, on actual collection of revenues, and other factors that may impact it, so that we can bring that data to you and, if necessary, make recommendations to revise the program order or to shift things forward or backward depending on the actual situation. You have if you don't look at this on your monitor because it's really hard to read, but I believe you have an 11 by 17 copy of this. It shows our first cut at an overall program order for these projects. I believe the graphic depiction that you have here represents what I've tried to provide in my presentation. One other thing to make note of, this is a somewhat simplified version of a fairly sophisticated analysis which we do in the background. That analysis takes the projected, our estimated budget numbers for each of the individual project phases, plots that on a timeline against the tax revenue projections that we receive from the city to make sure that each project phase has the available amount of money in the bank to start before the beginning as shown on this timeline. So that's not obvious from this timeline, but you need to know that is going on in the background. And that's part of the ongoing process that I described before. Some highlights, once again, about each of the individual projects and why they're located where they are. Once again, the pay-as-you-go policy of the city is primary in determining where projects go within the program order. And all of the projects, we've tried to get at least one phase very early in the program, and I think you can see that we've done that in the program order which you have in front of you. And this is really just a summary of some of the things that that I've indicated to you in the earlier part of the presentation. Before I get on to the next steps, while we're still thinking a little bit about individual projects, we did receive some additional direction from some of the subcommittees during the last 2 days, and all of those subcommittees are represented here today. If I miss something, please don't hesitate. I know you won't hesitate to speak up and let me know, but these are just really some very brief points that I wanted to make the entire board aware of. Overall, we have told all the subcommittees that we have received and are in the process of analyzing some preliminary economic development impact data, which we did not have available for the preparation of this initial program order. That data will be presented to the Joint City Council Advisory Committee meeting on April 19th. With respect to the Convention Center, we've been asked to provide an alternate iteration of the program order with the goal of moving the Convention Center construction to an earlier point in the program. We'll provide that at the April 19th meeting. The subcommittee made a specific request for economic development impact data. Once again, that will be provided at the April 19th meeting. They also requested the opportunity to coordinate with the Modern Streetcar Subcommittee. The Downtown Public Park requested coordination with the Streetcar and River Subcommittees as their work goes forward. The Modern Streetcar and Transit Hub Committee asked for a summary of the specific protocols and methodology used in the Economic Development Impact Study. We had planned on providing that, and we'll provide that at the April 19th meeting. Oklahoma River Improvements, their goal right now is to try to develop a project priority list, and toward that end they have another meeting which is currently being scheduled, and we are also scheduled to meet with Mike Knopp to assist in that process. Actually, we're going to do that on Friday. Health and wellness centers, we made a pledge to that subcommittee to work closely with their consultant, AIP and KMD, to coordinate that scope as well as we can so that we're all on the same page as we continue our work. The next steps I've mentioned several times. On April 19th, there is a scheduled joint City Council and MAPS 3 Advisory Board meeting. There are a number of things that will be discussed at that meeting. I've mentioned a number of them, but we will, one of the goals for that meeting is to try to finalize the actual project order so that in early May, City Council might adopt the implementation plan in its final form. Some of the information that you've seen today is a summary form of what the final implementation plan may look like. What you're seeing right now is a very early version, but we hope to have a more complete draft for that April 19th meeting so that in May, City Council can approve the actual implementation plan, which is intended to guide the process throughout the life of the program. Then in early June, for those projects which require consulting and or architectural and engineering services, the process would begin to solicit proposals for and to hire consultants. And with that, I will conclude my presentation and ask for questions.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you for not only the presentation, but for incorporating the comments that you received during the last couple of days as you met with all the subcommittees. And with that, we'll open it up for questions. Eric, did you have any supplementary information you wanted to provide?
I don't have anything further, but any questions, Mike can address those now.
Anyone?
I would just like to say, Mike, just like to say, having sat in through all of the presentations, or most of the presentations, I think you did an excellent job. This is a big project, or coordinating all these projects is a big project, and I think you've done an excellent job here. I'm sure there'll be tweaks some. I'm sure there'll be some other input. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the background information on it. But I think we as a committee now have a big job ahead of us, because not only do we advocate for the projects that we represent, we as a committee now have to kind of pull all this together and weigh a lot of other factors and look at the whole MAPS 3 program, and are we meeting the needs, and how is this all going to fit in together. So it's going to be, I think, a very interesting process as we try to kind of weigh those different responsibilities we have here.
Thank
you very much.
I appreciate that.
Anyone else? A question for Mike? Rusty?
I do have a question, and also, Mike, thank you, and very good presentations. We all appreciate it, I think. I want to ask a question about the convention center slide. It was one of your earliest slides on the cost. Getting back to this, in the parenthetical you have that the published budget of $280 million includes $30 million for the relocation of electrical substation. I know in a prior meeting, Councilman McAtee has discussed his thoughts, and I believe maybe represented the entire council on that. So I want a little more clarification, in particular, now that we're getting a little more information where the convention center may be located. What's the thought on the $30 million?
And if I might respond to that, some of the early data that we collected and some of the assumptions when we were starting this process nearly a year ago was that $30 million was desired to be budgeted towards the relocation of a substation as a part of the overall MAPS 3 program. And I think from some of the early comments that we received from the mayor as we kicked off the process, it was suggested that was a part of the convention center budget. So at this time, we're just taking that basic criteria, incorporating in this draft presentation and the draft schedule today for further comments. But at this point, council has made no decisions. The implementation plan is still under development. This is one of those items that's being considered. But ultimately, I think as you followed Mike's slides, we're working towards a workshop, a joint workshop. We're working towards a formal approval process, but just reiterating that there's no decisions that have been made today. The budget is just the budget. I truly believe that it will be something less than that figure, but all budgets are. We intend to bring those costs in underneath those, and we should have additional information on the substation and how we're going to address that, if at all, once more information is received.
Okay. Thanks.
Eric, in that regard, is the $30 million the total estimated cost of relocating the substation, or is it a joint cost between the city and the utility?
We're just not to that level of detail. We have had several meetings with OG&E, and there's not been a final cost estimate provided. It's strictly just a budget number. And again, I do believe it'll be less than that.
Any other questions or comments for Mike? Well, if not, Mike, thank you so much. We really appreciate the efforts that you and Nicole have made to meet with every subcommittee and all the work that's gone into this, and you've done a great job on the report, and we appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate that, and we couldn't do this without the assistance of city staff and without the assistance of the people on the subcommittees. It's been a good working relationship. We appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, then let's move to item 4, the MAPS 3 revenue and expenditure report. Copy is included in the packet. Did you want to comment on that, Eric?
I think just as we've discussed previously, we're going to continue to provide these to you on a monthly basis. We've changed the format a little bit this month, because I know that we sometimes discuss this. What we're asking for you to do this month is just to simply receive the report, and so we, as staff, would recommend simply that, just a receipt of the report by this advisory board, and answer any questions that you might have.
Michael?
I have discussed with Bob Punkila, the city treasurer, these adjustments that we've been receiving on the interest, and I think they have come to the conclusion that there's another debit adjustment to come back that will actually increase the amount of interest, that there was the method of allocating some of the interest in the past. They've revisited that, and I think we have a larger, I don't have any idea what the amount is, but a larger adjustment coming back that we should see in the future, so that the question was on the life of the project, the negative interest. There should be a positive number. on the life of the project. So we should see some adjustment, I think, in the future. And Eric, you may have an idea of what type of adjustment we're looking at there.
And we can confirm that the discussions that Mr. Adams has had with our city treasurer, there is some additional adjusting that you'll see. It's currently shown this month as negative, but you are going to see that convert to the positive, most likely starting with the next report. And so this, again, is a part of the overall adjustment that we've discussed in the last couple of meetings. It's just a way of how some of the calculations have changed. And so you should see that change starting again next month.
Further questions about the revenue and expenditure report? If not, we will go to item 5, which is a discussion and action item for us coming from the Transit Modern Streetcar Committee. And Zane, are you going to present that for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, as you recall, last week, the subcommittee came forth, or said that we would be coming forth with a partial route recommendation that would also include a protected route recommendation. I believe you have the maps with you. What we would like to do is get a motion from the Maps Advisory Board to consider these routes as partial and protected. And what we mean by partial would be that we would identify these routes so that they can coordinate early with the Project 180 and let them know that they need to take action or precautions, that we would like to use these streets, and so that when they relocate utilities and do construction, that they take that into consideration. And same with the protected route that was identified to them, that possible routes that we may add to our streetcar system, and also like them to take the same precautions in Project 180. So what we would like to do today is have a motion to the advisory board to take forward to City Council our proposed routes as they are laid out in the drawing. So,
Sue? Sorry. Why don't we do this? If you want to make that motion, why don't we have the motion, have it seconded, then we'll have discussion.
okay. I'd like to make a motion that we receive the recommended route drawings and proceed to the City Council as a recommended routes as shown in the drawings.
Is there a
I
second?
will second that.
Motion's been made and seconded. Is there discussion? Sue?
The question I have is, with regards to the possible sites for the convention center, do these routes hit those sites?
Yeah, Zane or I think can respond to that. I think one of the things that I'll just note on the drawings is that you'll notice that there are some dashed lines that are included on the partial route recommendation that are more towards the bottom of the drawing. You'll also find on the second drawing it has some of the protected routes. The subcommittee's had several discussions about making sure that they're not making too many decisions without the locations of the hub, the convention center. There's also some interest in making sure that it serves the park, the new MAPS 3 park, correctly. And so the entire drawing is subject to change, but they've even concentrated certain efforts on that lower half of this main loop and on the second drawing to reserve their right to further develop that once those locations are determined. And so this represents about 4 miles of the 5 to 6 miles of available. And so there's additional mileage that is also in addition to this that we think can also be available. So I think they've taken that into account, and Zane could offer additional comments.
What I'd add to that is it's possible that once we get an A&E to look into these, that we may need to make adjustments to the map on different streets or turns and things like that. So while this is the proposal that we would like to submit forward, it's subject to change because of the technical aspects of what we could run into later on. And yes, we have tried to take into consideration the convention center, the hub, and the park when we had our discussions.
Great.
Further questions for Zane? Well, we have a motion before us. If there's not further discussion, as many as favor the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. All right. Eric, is there anything under item 6 that you want to discuss with us today? The discussion?
I think just a couple of comments just generally in regard to the MAPS 3 program, and I'm going to go ahead and address just a couple of the informational items in your packet just to kind of give you an idea of what those include. With Mike's update today, there's obviously a lot of development on the implementation plan. We've got the workshop. Hopefully you've reserved that time on your calendars, 8:30 on April 19th, and we will be providing some additional information in regard to that shortly. There's been significant progress on the park demolition, or of the post office demolition within the park. So just as kind of a status update of that, there's a lot of demolition that's underway. Included also are 2 contracts for sale for parcels V19 and V20. I'm going to ask Jovan to come up in just a moment and give us a map update as well. But V19 and V20 are included as informational items. These contracts were negotiated with property owners that are currently on those parcels, and they found relocated homes, or they found new homes to relocate to. And in the essence of time, these have already gone to the City Council on Tuesday, but we wanted to bring those to you for your information to let you know that those were MAPS 3 expenditures, those were MAPS 3 contracts. And so we have somewhat made this more efficient in taking these out of order, but those are in your packets today for that reason. And then with Jovan, if we could do a map update, I think we could get a status of the overall Upper Park.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Again, Jovan Bullard with Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority. On the map, as reflected on the screen and I guess on your monitors there, from the map of last month's meeting, there have been 4 significant changes. Number V12, partial V12, an offer has been made, so it shows up in the light blue. And of course, V19 and V20, they went to council this past Tuesday. So even though the closing has not taken place, we're pushing those into the acquired status. And the V28 now shows up as acquired instead of under contract. And those are the 4 changes to the map from last month. Be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
The only other 2 items that are in your informational packet today is the Robinson Bridge Council item. This was the $168,000 that was also approved by City Council, and I just wanted you to have a copy of that memo that went to City Council for consideration. And then the last item in your packet, as promised, is we've brought the final contract for the Health and Wellness Scope of Work contract to you, just as information as well. But with that, I know we have subcommittee reports today, and I can answer any additional questions you might have on the overall program.
As we move to item 7, then, the subcommittee reports, I want to begin by asking Eric to discuss with us the progress we're making on the interaction between the subcommittees. I know that there has been a fair amount of discussion about Modern Transit, Convention Center, Park. Would you describe for us, Eric, how the process we're using for the committees to communicate with each other?
You know, there's been several requests, especially during this week, for coordination efforts between subcommittees, and I think that we're prepared to do that. If we find the need to have a joint meeting and actually have 2 subcommittees meet at the same time to discuss and take action on items, we can do so. Obviously, we're at a stage right now where there's a lot of preliminary information. Convention Center site study is underway, for example. There's some small actions being taken on the park. But we're prepared to do that as necessary, and I think, we'll just address those as they come up and as the need arises. But that is something that remains to be on the table that we can proceed in the future.
Thank you. Well, then let's start with the subcommittee reports. Taking the easy one first, Sue Hooper, why don't you tell us about the Convention Center?
Well, after receiving the report from ADG and Mike Mize regarding the implementation plan, the members of the subcommittee expressed their concern regarding the timeline and the convention center, the loss of revenue and the ability to garner conventions to Oklahoma City is a factor every week, every year that the facility isn't available. So that's part of that outcome for the economic study that we're going to have. Populous presented sites for consideration to the subcommittee based on a criteria that was earlier outlined to us in an earlier committee report. There were a combination of about 8 sites and then some hybrids of those sites. And the committee agreed to a shorter list of about 4 sites and some hybrids to keep in consideration. So that study's based on, again, that multi-criteria tier. And so those sites now will go through again the scrutiny of that criteria, and they'll come back to us with that. And we have another 3-hour workshop planned or mid-April. I don't know, do you want the sites named?
We can, they're public. I mean, if you want to include those in your report? Sure.
Okay. Bricktown East Hybrid, that's around the Coca-Cola area. North Bricktown, then there's a North Bricktown Hybrid. And that's just a nice word of saying, and maybe a little tweak to what was presented. The Court Shore North Hybrid, and some, including the Convention Center with that. Is that correct, Eric?
I believe so, and I think, we do have some presentation materials that if you, as advisory board, were interested in, we'd be happy to prepare those. We can get those emailed to you. They were presented at the meeting, and then obviously Populous, as they get ready to prepare for the next workshop, will bring back revised information, revised drawings that we can also make available. But our office does have all that information, so just let me know if you're interested.
Thank you.
Questions for Sue? Rusty?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Did I miss one? I thought that was 3. Is there, oh no, I'm sorry, North Bricktown.
There's a Bricktown North Hybrid that's a little different from the North Bricktown.
Okay.
And actually,
Oh, the existing Cox Center was the
Yeah.
4th. I did have a question about...
Court Shore North.
Yes, and I did get that. I missed the existing Cox Convention. I did have a question about one. I saw it in the minutes from your March 1. I believe it was your workshop meeting. It was the John Weeman addressed the committee on behalf of Skirvin. I wondered if you cared to share with us. I've heard some of what that discussion was. I thought I might like to hear it. Maybe the rest of the committee would like to hear what that presentation.
And let me provide that. John Weeman with Skirvin Partners did approach our office just last week with a proposal to look at the development of one of the convention center sites that would incorporate the Skirvin Hotel. And so that proposal was received, and we forwarded that quickly to Populous. And so it's going into consideration. Since they've only had it for a few days, it's going to be more a part of their next development or their next workshop and as a part of the presentation that they'll be making there. But it is one of the current potential sites. It's a hybrid of that site. So the North Bricktown site actually, although one site on the list, is actually going to have multiple development opportunities that includes the proposal that we received from Skirvin Partners.
I appreciate it. And the one particular thing that was intriguing to me, and maybe I heard the volume report out of it, were they offering some sort of funding to make their proposal work? And if so, I hadn't heard at all how much that might be. Is that even right? Was there a proposal providing funds?
There's no financial details that were included with the proposal.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Anyone else? Question for Sue or the committee?
Eric?
I do. With the Cox Convention, the current site, will they have to close that down totally if they start reconstruction? And won't we be losing a lot of revenue that way?
Well, according to Populous, the idea is that if that was the site, we'd take that into consideration, and no, it would not close. So there would be a plan for keeping it open and working around it.
Thank you.
Others? Well, thank you, Sue. Rusty, State Fair?
Yes, thank you. We did meet this month and had very good attendance and good discussions. Nothing really new to report. There were discussions about the budget constraints that Mr. Mize mentioned, but other than that, no real big changes to the plan, and we're just continuing. Nothing else to report.
Any questions for Rusty? Okay, Dee, you want to tell us about the River Subcommittee?
Yes, we met this week, and we decided as a committee that Mike Knapp needed to give us more detail on what he needs to immediately take the river to where it needs to be on an international and national level with WASIS. We need to know exactly what he needs. There was a lot of discussion about moving the whitewater earlier rather than later because it would be a money-making activity and proposition that the citizens could enjoy. And we are going to, because of this, we're going to reschedule an early meeting next month before the April 19th meeting so that we can have a better look and better scope of this. So, thank you.
Okay. Kimberly, Park?
Yes, the Parks Committee met yesterday, and I'd like to thank the Transit Committee for letting us take a little bit of their time as our meeting kind of went a little long. ADG's presentation sparked a lot of enthusiasm in our group as well. just as this advisory board began, very anxious, trying to put pictures in their minds on how these projects would work, and as we come together, our subcommittee is also to that level. And so yesterday, amidst a lot of our discussions, our group is going to be putting together, each independently, a list of the top 10 considerations that they want to see put into both the upper park and the lower park. They will also make a list of the top 10 recommendations that they would like to see considered by the consultant and ultimately the architects in conjunction with the other things that bound the park, as possibly the convention center, transit, and as the park properties interact with Core to Shore and also with Project 180. And then finally, they're going to list their top 10 concerns for the budget and how the park is formed. And the goal would then be to assimilate all those so that we can incorporate that into a possible meeting and bring that to our workshop on the 19th. But a great group of thinkers with a lot of experience, and it's really going to be fun.
Questions about the park? Thank you, Kimberly. Well, Senior Wellness Centers, Michael Dover.
Thank you, Tom. I can get through this without this allergy drainage today. Really tough. As Eric mentioned, we now have a contract with Architects in Partnership out of Norman, the consulting group that will fairly quickly, I think it's fair to say, will get the health and wellness centers up to par with some of the other projects. They're on a very ambitious schedule. In about 90 days, in fact, I expect that a lot of their, not all of their work will be done. In this first phase of the consultant work in the next month, they will be looking at things like the demographics of the city in terms of the aging population. They will be looking at similar projects in the regional area that they may learn about things that will be very, very helpful as we plan what we want to do here in Oklahoma City. They will begin, I think, that process of developing the core program functions that probably will be relatively the same in all of the wellness centers. Having said that, I think it's really important to note that, as if you all recall, it really is that institutional partner who is going to be paying the operational costs for these wellness centers that make it very, very important that when we look at what the institutional partners, their preferences and their programs and how that's a fit, will determine just how each of these wellness centers will be completed. Again, they will have their first report to us. Eric, I have a question for you. In the contract, their first report is 30 days after notice to proceed. Is notice to proceed when the consul approved that contract?
We actually issue the notice proceeds independently of our office via letter. So typically we'll have a kickoff or a work meeting with them to make sure that they understand all the givens and everything that's ready to go. I expect that notice to proceed actually be issued this week.
Okay.
So the
in
actual
about a
notice
month
will start.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So I think really quickly, Tom, and that the wellness centers and the background work that needs to be done to get these kind of up to par, I think it's going to happen. I'm pretty excited about it.
Good. Questions? Thank you, Michael. Let's see, trails and sidewalks. Sue, are you going to make that presentation?
We're going to have Zane do it. Zane
great.
Boatwright.
Great. Zane?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To begin with, the Trails Subcommittee is going to bring forward at the next month's meeting a proposal to identify 3 routes that are in conjunction with the Trails Master Plan. So you'll see a proposal similar to what the Transit Streetcars Committee did, identifying 3 possible trails. I want to make sure that it's clear, though, that this is by no means the end of the Trails Master Plan. This doesn't complete the master plan. These are just the 3 trails that we identified under MAPS 3. So I've heard some talk that people are throwing up their hands saying, well, that's the end after MAPS 3. That's not it. Trails Master Plan is still out there. It may be updated. We're only identifying 3 possible routes that are included in that to be covered under MAPS 3. From a sidewalks perspective, we don't have a master plan for Oklahoma City for sidewalks. What we've been asked to do is ask each member to go out and come back next month with possible criteria that we might look at to begin with some sidewalks. That being, do we want to concentrate on schools and connecting them with neighborhoods, or do we want to concentrate on transit bus stops and connect those with neighborhoods or shopping centers, or do we want to just go out throughout the city and connect where sidewalks have ended and picked up and just fill in the space? So those are some of the considerations that we're considering for next month.
Very good. Any questions for Zane?
I have one comment, if I may, on sidewalks.
Certainly.
I would just encourage the committee to look at programs like Safe Routes to Schools, which are federal dollars that are available to piggyback onto funds.
Thank you. That was discussed, and that is being considered.
All right. Zane, is there anything else that you want to, I know that you've already reported from the Transit Committee, but anything else that you all want to add under this topic? Or have you taken care of everything?
So I guess what I'd like to say is that to kick off from where we are, we've presented to the MAPS Advisory Board the proposed or potential routes that we'd like to go to. This by no means is the end of streetcar. We don't want people to see that, well, this is it, here, these are the streets, that's it, it doesn't go anywhere else. The whole vision is that we will have spokes or spines running off of this. This is just the foothold, so to speak, for transit. We've got a lot of area to cover. We have to identify technical experts that can come in and identify problems that we might have with a route, and there's cars to look at, stops to look at, so by no means is this the end.
Right. Thank you. Well, then, that completes our subcommittee reports. Now, I will just call to your attention under item 7, the informational items. We have heard about some of those previously from Eric. There are items in your packet for your information. None of those are action items today, but I want to give you the opportunity to ask any questions of Eric and the staff, or of anyone, about any of those informational items that are included. We won't try to go through them one at a time unless someone has a question about them, or unless Eric wants to comment on one of them.
And I have no further comments, just any questions you might have.
All right. Then I want to offer each of you the chance, and I've offered Councilman McAtee the opportunity for comments from the City Council. Anything you'd like to tell us, Larry?
Well, I think the City Council will be very pleased because some of the vision that we cast out there as far as some of the projects that we thought needed some look-see at, like the wellness centers. I think the committees have done an excellent job on that. The question I have for you, Eric, is how much of this information will be available to the council prior to the April 19th meeting? Is there a briefing that you foresee? Will Mike be coming and giving his implementation plan, for example, to the council before then?
He's actually going to be with us next Tuesday for council as a part of a city manager report to give the same presentation to the rest of the council.
Excellent. So I think the council is in a holding mode right now. Whatever you've heard, the council is in a holding mode. We have been contacted, as you probably would expect, from some of the different subcommittee members as a result of what happened this week. And hopefully everybody is just sitting back saying, let's get some information before we make any statements. So I think that's excellent, and Mike will be there next Tuesday to brief us thoroughly on the implementation plan, and then there will probably be some forthcoming questions out of that. But I think things are moving in a very positive direction, and everybody's on board and excited and looking forward to the 19th. Thank you, Tom.
I wanted to also to express our appreciation. Councilmen have been attending some of these, various councilmen have been attending some of these subcommittee meetings, and we appreciate the continuing interest and the support of the council, and we're moving forward. Eric, you or any member of the staff have any additional comments? Well, this is the time then that we would all, I'm sorry, Michael.
I just had, I guess, a question, maybe a couple of comments. Eric, just to clarify, if any of these sites that are being considered for any of the projects are ultimately sited on land that's already owned by the city, is there any allocation to the MAPS project for the cost of that land, or does that free up money that's available for construction and other costs on that project?
So as Mike presented as a part of the implementation plan, the costs, the conceptual budgets, which will ultimately be the budgets for the projects, are all inclusive. So in the case that if a site was picked that was already city-owned, then it would obviously allow more money to be towards other purposes, construction, or whatever things that were part of that project.
Okay. I just didn't know whether there was a budget allocation that went against that way.
You know, we anticipate on several of the projects that some require land acquisition, some are going to have environmental remediation, some are going to have demolition, but all those costs have to be incorporated into those total project, the totals. And so what we're trying to do is keep the project separate in that regard, that there's not a separate budget for all these other things, so to speak, and that it's all inclusive cost.
And then I guess just some observations or comments from having sat in on most of the subcommittee meetings yesterday. I had a couple of thoughts and maybe seeking a little guidance and making sure we're on the right direction. One of the things that, having lived in Oklahoma City for 35 years, I've kind of thought that the city was kind of bisected east to west by I-40 and by the river. And one of the things that came up years ago when they started talking about relocating I-40 and getting it down to grade or below grade was trying to kind of open up that connection and eliminate some of those barriers. I found it a little interesting, I guess, in some of the comments made by the consultants on the convention center that they were still viewing the boulevard as somewhat of a barrier, mostly probably for pedestrian purposes. But I just thought that was an interesting concept or interesting observations, and that you know, as a result of this barrier, you know, that we haven't we ruled out basically the sites that were south of the boulevard, partly because of that consideration. That wasn't the only consideration, obviously. And one of the other considerations was the proximity or the lack of proximity, I guess, to existing hotel and restaurant development. And I know the city has stressed, and certainly with the Coeur d'Alene project, the desire to encourage development toward the river. So are we properly weighing, I guess, the existing developments that are in proximity to existing developments and the desire to proceed south and encourage development down there? I don't have any, you know, I guess problems with any of the decisions that have been made, but I just want to make sure that, that we're either working with or considering that. I mean, if that's the desire to encourage development that direction, are we helping that in the decisions we're making, or are we going against that, I guess? And so maybe the planning department or the council or somebody can give us some assurances that, you know, that we're in the right direction in that regard or not. And I was also, like I said, interested in the comments that the boulevard's still considered somewhat of a barrier to that development.
I think the majority of the comments on the boulevard as a barrier had more to do with pedestrian access to and from. Obviously, the boulevard has a certain width that's being prescribed, and that's obviously a significant item that's being studied as a part of the design. And how wide and what's passable and what's really going to encourage a walkable city. I don't think it's a boulevard that is a barrier to development, and that's, I think, a big difference. And it's one thing to be walkable, it's another to have it to where we do have a lot of form and function across the boulevard to the south, which we're going to begin with the MAPS 3 Park. And so there is a grander plan through the city's planning department of a Coeur d'Alene vision, and I know that there's a lot of extra things outside of MAPS 3 that are going to be occurring as we talk about development around the park. And so I know that the city is very much in tune with that, and it's something that we're looking forward on. But as that convention center study, and as Mr. Adams mentioned, I mean, there's a lot of considerations, whether it's the true physical barriers that we're seeing with the elevated railroad structure, whether it's the new boulevard as it comes from east to west and it's in the air at some point in the east and it finally lands to ground at the Oklahoma Avenue, you know, around the theater spot, and that has driven a lot of the decision process. But the sites, I believe, as they were eliminating potential sites, I mean, they've taken a lot of interest in existing hotel stock as a major criteria. Obviously, a lot of the access and the proximity to some of the entertainment venue, and I think that's been more of a driving factor than really the lack of what they would see as a pedestrian access. But they did mention that, and it is going to be a challenge that's going to have to be solved as a part of the Boulevard project to make sure that it's a passable boulevard north and south.
Michael, I'd like to add, and Sue may want to comment as well, but as a member of that convention subcommittee, I guess we have been thinking that our job was to find the best location for the convention center, and that economic development would certainly be a factor in that. But carrying out some grander policy plan probably might fall more in the purview of the city council than maybe that subcommittee. But But in that workshop, I look forward to hearing what they tell us about it, because that may be...
Exactly, and I'm not suggesting that, one or the other. I just wanted to make sure that, I know that one of the criteria for the convention center was also to consider future development.
Absolutely.
But, so, is there equal rating for supporting existing development or supporting future development? And are we considering the way that we should be? I don't know what the grand plans are, but it was just an observation, I thought.
I think that's a very good question, and one that I think we'll get a chance to talk about on the 19th.
I think one of the things, we might, I would hate to end up with, this big, beautiful park surrounded by 2 blocks of bulldozed land that we're sitting here 20 years from now looking at and saying, what's going on, or why did we build this park here? So I didn't know whether there was, whether we're supporting, I guess, that vision is the question.
Yeah. Councilman McAtee?
I want to make this very clear. This is just a personal observation, and I'm not speaking from the council. Right? I think that what came out of your convention subcommittee really shows the wisdom of the whole approach for this MAPS 3, because prior to engaging the consultants, some of us local yokels like myself may have had a predisposed idea of where the convention center should be based on our limited insights. And the convention recommendations that came out totally changed that to where is the best location for the convention center. And as I've thought about this over the last couple of days, from my limited perspective, nothing of those 4 sites detracts from the Court Ashore vision, which is a 30, 40, 50-year vision for what's going to go on around the park. That will take place whether the convention center is south of the boulevard or north of the boulevard. They're 2 different pieces of the puzzle. And so again, I think to sum up, the wisdom of having the consultants come in and the objective way that the convention committee looked at the sites is very, very encouraging, that we're going to get a site eventually that will be beneficial to all of Oklahoma City and not be counter to what you're talking about, the Court Ashore vision, which is another vision.
Well, and I do respect the process, and I don't have any qualms with any of the decisions that were made. And I didn't have any preconceived ideas of where the convention center should be. And it's not just the convention center. I think, we also are looking at transit, touches the corner of the park, but it doesn't cross the boulevard. It doesn't do, the current proposed plan's not doing anything to help in that regard, if that is what we're supposed to be doing. So it was just kind of the grand vision of the whole thing. I just wanted, and again, I just wanted to make sure that we were following, I guess, the vision there, and we're considering those things properly.
Very good. Susan? I'm sorry, Zane?
Mike, I just wanted to add to it. In our discussions on transit, we have talked about whether or not the streetcar would run down a portion of the boulevard. That has been discussed, and how we would support that.
Did you have anything? Anybody have anything?
I just had one more comment. In my profession, part of what I do is event planning, and it's interesting to see as convention groups put more and more demands on what they expect out of what a convention center venue can offer, not only in proximity to how many hotels are nearby, but what amenities are within walking distance, and affordability and entertainment. So, it's interesting to see that not only is we have our perspective to think about, but I know that our consultants are also looking into the grand effect that if we're going to build the convention of the site, that we need to make sure that it encompasses those things so it's easy to bring those larger conventioneers to the city.
Thank you. Michael?
Eric, one quick question. Is there a timeline for the determining where the hub is going to be?
We received a hub update yesterday during the Transit Committee meeting, and I think they've got their next meeting scheduled for this Friday. It's an internal meeting that Jacobs is having with their team. I don't know that a next date has been set, but we've been given the spring time frame of having a decision on the hub.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those comments. Anything else? Well, we now want to open it up to the public. If there are citizens here that want to be heard, Jeff, you're recognized.
Jeff Bezdek at 605 Northwest 4th. I serve on the MAPS Transit Subcommittee, and I think Zane did an excellent job doing the overview of our recommendations, and we appreciate his work and his leadership, as well as Nathaniel's. Nathaniel Hardy, yes, would be here if he wasn't out in the reserves. So great guy. I just wanted to go over a couple of things. At the end, I serve on several committees as well in terms of the transit. I serve on the Regional Transit Dialogue Committee, as well as the Alternatives Analysis, which is running a parallel course to our ongoing MAPS 3 objectives with the streetcar and pursuing federal funds to supplement anything that we decide to build. Just a couple things. The route that came out for recommendation is a direct reflection of City Council's desires for trying to get to the perimeter of downtown and get out of downtown. It's a midtown to bricktown route, and it does not constitute the entire 5 to 6 mile objective of the overall streetcar system, so you can almost think of this thing as a phase 1A. So once we know exactly where the convention center is and where the front door and the back door of the hub is, as Zane mentioned, we'll be able to better establish how much track mileage we have left over, and of course, once we go into preliminary engineering, we'll be able to start determining some actual costs. The other thing that I wanted to address is that there are different volunteers that have walked the route and have spoken with merchants, property owners, tenants, the churches along this route to make sure that the community receives this route as a good recommendation and that there is no real negative persuasion about it. And we really have not received any objections from any of the people along the route so far. So I just wanted to let you know that we've been meeting twice a month up until this last month to expedite this process. And while we might be a little bit ahead of some of the other subcommittees, we've done that primarily because of Project 180. And looking at the other streetcar systems that have been built in the United States, a large portion of their budget is utility relocation and the issues that are in the street. And while we don't know exactly what all the issues are, since we don't have an engineer yet, based on those other cities, we expedited this process to try to inform that process as best as we could to conserve taxpayer money and preserve the Devon gift that has been given. I perceive it as a gift. I don't know if that's exactly how it should be perceived. The other thing that I'd like to say is looking at those other streetcar systems and how long it took them to get rail from manufacturers, how long it took them to get vehicles and go through the process, and also factoring the federal process that we're undertaking. ADG's schedule is very well conceived and very appropriate to meshing with the ongoing Project 180 and streaming from a technical standpoint. And while I'm sure every subcommittee wants to see their project first, and we're thrilled that ADG has proposed that we be at the very beginning with sidewalks and some of the other projects, in terms of preserving taxpayer money and in terms of integrating the ongoing efforts downtown, considering those technical issues with procurement, and particularly the things that are going on in Japan, especially, are now adding some volatility. They've done an incredible job coming out with a proposed schedule, and I've also consulted with the people on our AA federal side, the engineers and the planners on that side, and they agree that is an excellent timeline. And so that is something that we are going to continue to advocate to council, that they maintain the recommendations that have been set forth by the ADG schedule. Regarding the federal funding, towards the end of this month, there will be a public meeting. I couldn't find the date, but if people want to go see what's going on with the streetcar and the federal funding end of things, there will be a public meeting to update the public on that ongoing process. And let's see. That's pretty much it.
Well, thank you for your service on the subcommittee, and thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Are there others? Well, if not, thank you for attending, and we're adjourned. Thank you.